Clear this side.
During the last weekend of February 1999, the A4 Pacific Sir Nigel Gresley was the star turn at the East Lancashire Railway's Winter Gala event. The tunnel outside Bury Station gives the journey a dramatic beginning, reminiscent of departures through the tunnels at King's Cross all those years ago. But 25 miles an hour on a preserved line is hardly what Gresley had in mind for his East Coast racehorses, and the A4's chief engineer Roger Barker was looking forward to something more spectacular in the springtime, when the engine was due to make an historic foray to the West Country. 6007 still had her mainline ticket. It was due to expire soon, so her owners wanted to make the most of it, not least because they needed the income to pay for a heavy overhaul expected to cost 6 figures. The plan was to take a rail tour right down to Plymouth behind the blue snowplough. Sister engine Mallard had been there during the 1948 locomotive exchanges. Now Sir Nigel Gresley would follow in her tracks. But it was never to be. A few days later, the engine's superheater pipes failed. Now they'd have to find a suitable substitute to uphold the honour of the LNER in the West Country. As luck would have it, the very engine for the job had just come back into service. So often in steam days, when a Gresley Pacific failed, its train would be taken over by one of his mixed traffic engines of the V2 class. And now the only survivor, the National Railway Museum's Green Arrow, was back from heavy surgery, as the museum's curator of operations described.
Well, quite an extensive boiler overhaul. The outer wrapper of the firebox was renewed, the bottom 9 inches of it was renewed throughout, really extensive repairs, stay renewal and foundation ring rivets all replaced, etc. Very, very extensive overhaul. And we had troubles initially when the boiler was first steamed with leaking stays and etc. Most of that work is largely cleared up now.
The Great Western Express layout, as on King Edward I, was the 460 wheel arrangement. Gresley's 3-cylinder V2 was a very different machine in almost every respect.
Yes, the engine's a 262 Prairie type wheel arrangement, and with the trailing truck, a very odd arrangement of trailing truck, single axle at the back of the loco. It takes the weight of the back of the firebox and relieves. The V2 is quite a heavy engine for a 6-coupled engine, and so it takes some of the back of the weight of the firebox from the trailing coupled axle.
V2s never reached Devon, where the Kings had reigned supreme with their ability to dig in on the banks.
The idea was with the 460s that with the train hanging back on the banks, then most of the weight was the Dijon weight. But as I say, you've still got very heavy sort of 22-ton axle load on the V2, and she's very sure-footed.
In 24 hours' time, Green Arrow would be making railway history. For now, though, she was living in the lion's den, surrounded by GWR machinery. Ray Towell was confident Green Arrow would acquit herself well. Back in the 30s, Gresley had designed her to be able to tackle almost anything.
I think Gresley at that time had inherited a lot of old pre-group freight engines and to some extent mixed traffic engines. He wanted a good, solid, modern engine to his own design that would do virtually any passenger work and any goods work, especially fitted freight work, a lot of fitted van trains, that sort of thing. He built an engine that would, as I say, support the Pacifics with their passenger work in case of their non-availability, and one of these engines always laid over at Peterborough North in case anything coming from King's Cross, and I've seen it happen several times in my boyhood. One of these engines would step straight in. One of the engines that failed was Madge Wildfire. What a marvellous name that was. And so the engine you're looking at here, the firebox is the same as the A4, like Mallard's or Nigel Gresley, the same as the A3, which is like Flying Scotsman, but of course with a smaller boiler, a shorter boiler. So the steaming capacity and the heat transfer is very good indeed. A smaller wheel, better adhesion with big heavy trains, and still capable of running to 80 miles an hour and so.
As the hours ticked away, the support crew from the National Railway Museum were hard at work on the engine.
Today we've been over the pit, all the axle boxes have been checked, lubrication to every mechanical point of the 2-to-1 gear, some grease points, some oil points. The tender's been filled with water. We're in the process of setting up the coaling for this afternoon.
By the end of the day, Green Arrow was ready. All they needed now was some decent weather. But what the Met men were promising was a violent storm. The next morning, Devon was beginning to feel the power of a deep depression brewing in the southwest approaches. Didcot was in a different world, blue skies and fluffy clouds. It looked like any other lovely Easter day as the duty locomotive moved off shed. The Great Western Society's 042 tank engine was fresh from overhaul itself and, like Green Arrow, looked resplendent in the spring sunshine. But the Green Arrow team knew they'd be in for a rough ride later in the day, and one particular commodity would be literally like gold dust when they hit the South Devon banks. So they would carry as much of it as they possibly could, knowing that it could save them from the very real risk of slipping to a standstill on any one of 3 stiff climbs.
A steam locomotive not only needs water and coal and oil, but it needs this stuff, which is sand, pure dry sand. When an engine's working hard, especially on the severe gradients of the South Devon banks, there is a tendency to slip on the rails. And sand, believe it or not, is the one thing that can stop it. So it's vital, as much as coal and water.
If it's very wet, rail, then adhesion is virtually as good, oddly enough, as on a dry rail. It's when you get frost and mist on the rail that you tend to lose your grip. But the LNER engines are pretty well equipped. They have steam sand and gravity sand, so the steam forces the sand through a jet between the rail and the wheel, and of course the gravity, it just goes out from a pipe very close set between the rail and the wheel.
It was time to hand the engine over to the EWS footplate crew. The traction inspector for the whole trip was the celebrated Bristol driver Brian Dudley Ward, who started out on Eastern Region steam and was relishing taking the first V2 to the West Country. The train would cover 205 miles in 7 hours, limited to 60 miles an hour because Green Arrow wasn't carrying AWS equipment. There'd be water stops at Newbury and Frome, and at Exeter, where they'd also replenish the coal. The driver and fireman, Dave Davis and Chris Greystone from Old Oak Common, would be relieved at Westbury by Bristol men. They were 2 minutes and 40 seconds late leaving, but were about to make a sprightly getaway, and the 388-ton train would be moving at a mile a minute within 5 miles.
How you doing?
Tour organiser Andy State prepared to welcome his customers aboard.
The buffet bar is open if you're in standard class towards the front of the train, if you're in first class towards the rear. So sit back, relax. Next stop should be Newbury Racecourse, where Green Arrow is due to take water. Thank you.
Enthusiasts had come from all over Britain to join the train. The railway world was fascinated to see how Green Arrow would cope with Whiteball, Dainton and Rattery Banks. Among those poised with their stopwatches was Alistair Wood from Dunblane.
It's a hobby, which quite a lot of people do, as you see other people on the train. And this is the first time, as far as we know, that this engine has been on this line and over the South Devon Banks. So it will be very interesting to see what it does.
It's another day out. I tend to do this most weekends. So. Tell us, how widely do you travel?
Oh, all over the country. All over the country. We're trying to get as many lines with mainline steam as we possibly can. I mean, I've been doing this now for over 20 years, and I've done just over 100,000 miles of preserved steam on the main line. The Great Western Main Line, when it was built, contained some very steep banks, much steeper than you find on the other main lines. We've had trips over there with all sorts of different engines, but this is the first time we've had this particular engine, so it'll be very interesting to see how it performs.
Pastime Rail organised trips all over Britain, but this one was special.
From a personal point of view, it's my favourite piece of line. The sea wall between Exeter and Newton Abbot is probably the most scenic bit of railway in Britain. And then there's the South Devon Banks, which is always a big appeal, particularly to steam enthusiasts, with the climb over the 3 banks. Very hard climb, so the engine has to work extremely hard. It's very scenic as well. Anywhere in the West Country is nice.
As the train approached its first water stop, which would be at Newbury Racecourse, nobody, it seemed, had noticed that something was missing. The train was supposed to be carrying a Mayflower headboard, celebrating the fact that its destination was the point of departure for the ship that carried the Pilgrim Fathers. But the missing headboard wasn't the most pressing problem facing the train crew as they prepared to apply the brakes at Thatcham, 3 miles before Newbury. Their dilemma, as they eased through the racecourse station, was where to stop. Somewhere round here was a hydrant. In fact, it's marked by the blue plastic markers, but not surprisingly they run right past it, for the markers are all but invisible from the footplate. Only a few lineside photographers were able to record what happened next. The train was forced to set back, and later on Ray Towell would realise that the headboard was still in the support coach. The actual hydrant is in a car park on the edge of the racecourse. The locomotive still has a good 100 metres to go before it reaches the right spot. This is an example of what happens when line-side vegetation is allowed to reach jungle proportions. In fact, the support crew would find themselves blazing a trail up the bank for the water hose. The water stop was booked for 35 minutes, so there was plenty of time for the footplate crew to complete their needle-in-a-haystack shunt and still be away in time. The only real repercussion of this incident was that, unforgivably, the guard's cup of tea was late.
Is that kettle boiling yet?
Oh, is that?
Thank you very much, sir.
It's hot. There's not a lot of water in it.
Headboard in position, and now hiding shyly behind a smokescreen, Green Arrow set off again for the short stroll to Newbury Station, where there was a booked 2-minute stop. For the record, after some smart work at Waterstop, they eased away from Newbury a whole 17 seconds late. Ahead of them, the famous stretch past Crofton Pumping Station, which sits above the lovely Kennet and Avon Canal. The photographers wait for Green Arrow, the Sunday mountain bikers scurry past, and on the canal itself, a single mallard. 50 years on, the LNER is coming back in style. Savernake Summit. Green Arrow tops the 1 in 106 bank at precisely the 60 mph permitted maximum. The 3-cylinder roar is music to Ray Towell's ears. His engineers, men like Rodney Litton and Dave Campy, have nursed the big engine back to health, and Savernake has demonstrated the integrity of their work.
Well, we were climbing the Savernake Summit, which is quite a climb, borders the Kennet and Avon Canal, beautiful run up there, sweeping grades, and we topped the summit something like 50 miles an hour, I would say, going really well.
He strikes me he was giving it some welly up the front.
Yes, well, you need to keep section times, and so he was working the locomotive to make sure it to the road.
You know, one thing that amazes me is looking out the window. There's hardly a field, hardly a tree, hardly a road where there isn't someone with a camera. It's really a magnet, isn't it?
Oh, it is indeed. A great attraction. I mean, the railway itself, long gradients, sweeping curves, beautiful countryside. What more can you ask? Perhaps a little sun.
Well, so far it's going very well. We couldn't have wished for anything better. Plenty of steam. You can hear the safety valve blowing. Speed's all right, we're on time, everything at present is rosy.
Well, I've just been down to see Rodney, who was the leading fitter on the job, and I've just hugged him. So there we are. And I was virtually in tears coming over the top of Savernake in fine style. It's down to Rodney, Dave Campy, as you say, the many volunteers who work and strive to keep the engine
A crew change. Jeff Ewan's on the shovel, Colin Parry driving. For Colin, there's a steep and amusing learning curve as he gets to grips with Green Arrow for the first time, to the obvious delight of his mates.
Trying to get this lever down in the forward position. Will you run away now? You give us a... All right then, let's go away. Here we go then, gentlemen.
Ahead of them, after stops at Frome and Taunton, is the 15-mile, ever-steepening climb that culminates in Whiteball's 1 in 80.
Now we're on our way, gentlemen.
By the time they get to Exeter, they'll have been travelling for 4.5 hours. The fire will be very dirty. It'll need completely rebuilding in just 60 minutes.
Well, you goes to a good trip.
Leaving Castle Carey, the train is 4 minutes ahead of schedule and running easily, so the traction inspector can turn his attention to cleaning the footplate and laying the coal dust. For these long-serving engine men, it's just like old times, and though it may be a third of a century since the demise of steam, the skills are never forgotten. But the EWS men aren't the only people on the footplate who can remember those days. The support crew member on this section, Jim Sarney, fired V2s out of Marylebone in the 60s.
It's something that I never ever thought I would do again. I mean, when steam went off the railways, we all thought that was it. And I brought a steam road locomotive because I thought I must get steam from somewhere. And at that time, no one, I don't think, on BR ever thought that steam would return, and they really didn't. And today, it's special for me because Green Arrow on the front is an engine which I was very familiar with when they were working for a living on the railways. And I've got many fond memories of the Green Arrows and the A3s working from out of Marylebone, of course, to Nottingham and Sheffield and Manchester. And of course we were very lucky because it was a joint line. It meant that we got Great Western engines and LNER engines and LMS engines, so it was a nice piece of railway to be associated with.
Green Arrow has reached the first of the rain, the start of a 100-mile battle against the elements.
Put the bloody lights out!
Green Arrow is steaming really well, but while Colin Parry relaxes into the job, the fireman and traction inspector are thinking about the boiler demands ahead. They're approaching Wellington, where City of Truro came the other way, doing a ton 100 years ago. In the down direction, though, it's a different matter, and the gradient will rob Green Arrow of 20 miles an hour in just 3 miles, dipping to a minimum of 36 miles an hour at Whiteball Summit. A glance at the photographers in the fields confirms that Green Arrow is about to confront the first of her 3 great labours. Green Arrow had proved sure-footed so far, and the enginemen were becoming increasingly confident about their new mount. Colin Parry was later to say that the V2 felt at least as capable at these speeds as the longer-legged A4s. Now it's downhill all the way to Exeter, and this is their chance to have a good look at the fire. And the traction inspector is already working away with the irons. This is the section where the railway runs alongside the M5 motorway for several miles near Tiverton. A wave to the motorists from Colin Parry, but everyone else is too busy to pay much attention. One driver has rigged up a video camera on the back seat, but rail safety rather than road safety is their concern, and seeing people on the trackside, let alone without high visibility vests, always puts the engine men on edge. On a happier note, For Jeff Ewins, there are a few moments to recover before the brakes go on for Exeter. There's another rail tour in the station, which causes the crew a few moments' mirth as they bring Green Arrow down to walking pace. They don't yet know that the coal delivery they're supposed to rendezvous with can't get within 100 yards of the engine, so several tons of coal will have to be humped manually to the tender, and that will put the rest of the trip in jeopardy. Green Arrow's real battle is still to be fought, though for now they have the pleasure of coming to a standstill precisely 8 seconds early. Detached from her train, Green Arrow hurries back through Exeter Station. There's no time to lose. Jim Sarney's droll humour can't disguise their plight.
I'd like to buy some coal, sir. Very good quality stuff.
Time that should have been spent servicing the engine and rebuilding the fire is wasted carting bags of coal along the platform. Ray Towell had said from the outset that the hour at Exeter would be the key to a good trip, and his prophecy was coming horribly true. The last thing they want is a late start. If they lose their carefully timed path along the South Devon main line, the passengers could be hours late getting back to London. Most of the onlookers don't realise they're watching a drama unfold. Dave Campy looks a model of calmness as he checks the engine. At least there's no shortage of water, though whether it came from the sky or the standpipe is anyone's guess. The last of the coal comes aboard, and only just in time for Green Arrow to resume her place at the head of the train, which has been shortened by one coach to give them a 350-ton trailing load. She'll leave Exeter 6 minutes late, but fate has more tricks to play on them yet. The Leeds Plymouth HST is running 50 minutes late and is likely to cause knock-on problems for the Valiant steam loco. As usual, when people are in a hurry, more haste equals less speed, and the coupling of the engine to the train will give rise to some anxiety a few miles further on, when the train crew will have to cope with the consequences of a leaking brake pipe.
Ollie's now attempting to leave. Unfortunately, the weather's not in our favour, so he's having difficulty at the moment in getting the wheels to grip. Just put the feed on, put more water in the boiler. Jeffrey's now making the fire up, and it's a wide firebox on these locomotives, so basic idea to fire to this engine is to keep the fire well up in the back corners of the locomotive and have a thin fire at the front.
Evidence of the kind of weather they can expect during the afternoon is now all around them in the flooded fields, and just to make their happiness complete, the traction inspectors noticed the state of the tide.
As you can see, it looks like the tide is coming in, and if we're very lucky, Mr. Parry might get wet.
Now, the reason why Colin might get wet is waiting just around the corner. He'll be on the seaward side. No wonder GWR engines were right-hand drive. For now, though, Green Arrow is passing the calmer waters of the River Exe estuary. With the water looking perilously close, the crew's attention is now on another problem. The power's off by Cockwood Harbour, and in a few moments they'll need to brake for the scheduled pathing stop at Dawlish Warren, which is where that late-running HST will squeeze past them. But as they prepare to slow down, all eyes are on the brake pressure gauge.
Yeah, we're doing all right. We've got a little problem with the brake at the moment, but we'll go and sort it out when we stop. Well, for some reason, they may not have connected the train properly to the engine, and we're losing, the engine's not able to maintain the brake. It's supposed to maintain it at 21 inches of vacuum, the needle you can see on your left. See the left-hand side needle, it's dropping on its own. We shouldn't do that. So we reckon we may have a leak on the train.
They still don't know that the train from Leeds to Plymouth is out of its path, and that on the long track sections of South Devon it could well cause them a series of signal checks right where they don't need them. At least the 5-minute stand at Dawlish Warren will give them a bit more time to work on the fire.
Just like everything else, the harder you work the loco, the more fuel you're going to use.
The traction inspector has now sprung into action. His leadership will be a key factor in getting them over Dainton Bank, which pitches briefly to 1 in 36, requiring a volcanic boiler output. The passage of the late-running train hasn't escaped Brian Dudley Ward's attention. Like all the EWS traction inspectors, very little escapes his notice. And as they leave the storm-swept holiday village, he's already thinking about those signals. they get their first sight of the open sea.
Tunnels. There's 4 little ones and 1 long one. 1 long one. The line speed between here and Plymouth is 60 miles an hour. So we should technically be able to do it at the same time as an HST.
This HST, to be precise. Green Arrow's 60-mile-an-hour maximum is the same as the line speed, so the steam engine is already in Newton Abbot, keeping pace as the train from Leeds climbs Dainton Bank.
Those 2 trains that went in front of us, they might hold us back, so watch what you're doing.
They might hold us back. Remember what the man said.
About 2 miles, then it's a climb, a very short climb, we're running 45. So it's short, so it's steep, and it ends up in a tunnel. When we go over the top, we drop down all the way to the top there. Through the top there, then we climb up another bank. Alright, now what you do? We'll find out. Should be alright.
The speedo reads 36 miles an hour as they approach the echoing gloom of Stoneycombe Quarry. may have heard the traction inspector trying to explain that Dainton Summit is actually inside the tunnel. Their speed has fallen from 47 to 21 miles an hour in less than 2 miles. Ray Towell is visibly moved by the performance of the engine and the trio of railwaymen who fought to get her this far. But celebrations are premature. Totnes is the one place they do not want to find a red signal. The station is right at the foot of the longest bank, Rattery.
We got another one to go up yet. Very good.
The crew are cheerful, but their day has hardly been glamorous. Steam is hard work, dirty work, and steam engines can be very unforgiving at times.
It is totally over-glamorised today. The romance of steam. There was no romance with steam engines when they were working for real. There just wasn't. Most of them were dripping in oil and coal dust and filthy dirty. I remember riding down on the footplate of a Black 5 on a semi-fast from Marylebone to Nottingham, and the engine failed at Rugby, and it was taken off the train, put in a siding. Another engine was sent for, which took 2 hours to arrive, with a train full of people, and it was a Class 9F, and away we went again. And this Black 5 was cut up for scrap in Rugby station yard, and so we set off on a semi-fast train with it, and it got cut up for scrap before it ever got to Nottingham. You know, those were the sad days of steam.
And these are the happy moments. At Totnes, Green Arrow meets its second 14XX of the day, and Ray Towell records this wonderful little moment of history. But then, the brakes.
Well, he stopped us right on the bank.
A dead stand at the foot of Rattery Bank on a foul day.
We didn't need this, especially this weather. See what I mean? And we've got a bank to climb now.
Just let her help herself.
Well, we come to a stand at a very bad spot. So now we're having to let the engine do its own thing. If we try and force it, then we'll get ourselves in a lot of trouble. So the engine's going to have to do it, help itself, and we'll get there. Have no fear, we will get there. All right, Cole?
As they approach Marley Tunnel near the summit, they know the V2 has won the Battle of Devon. From here, it's all downhill to Plymouth. After all the problems, they're just 12 minutes late, and the whole of that delay was because they were being balked by the late-running high-speed train. In the war, when V2 locos took 20 coach loads, many a wise engineman rated these maids-of-all-work as Gresley's finest design, and few people at Plymouth would have argued. The EWS crew had clearly done a brilliant job. Ray Towell was full of praise for the way they'd handled Green Arrow on the greasy rails at Rattery. They'd been calm in a crisis, allowing the engine to find its way up the bank when any temptation to fiddle around with the controls would have been disastrous.
Beautiful. The two trains that went in front of us from Dawlish Warren
Because the sections are long after Newton Abbot, they haven't got enough time to clear. So we always catch trains up there, even with the post office train. So it's always going to happen. The only way you're going to get away with it is hold back for 5-10 minutes, but because you can't do that. So you're going to catch one up, and the sections are so long. You've got no choice. And I knew what was going to happen before we ever got there. I mean, we got over Dayton all right, but because it's only 55 mile an hour from Dayton, the top of the bank, into Totnes, but nearly always, a situation like that, we'll always catch something up and you'll get stopped.
She performs well. I mean, she performs as good, or if not better, than the A4 Gresley. The way she handles, I mean, she's a character on herself. This is the first time I've ever driven this particular type of Green Arrow, but I have driven the A4, which is Sir Nigel Gresley. I've had a fire-in turn on the A4, which is the other one, which is Union South Africa. And yeah, it's a love. It's great. And the character, I mean, you talk to her and she talks to you back. 3 cylinders. I mean, sometimes she argues, sometimes she doesn't. But it's always the driver that wins the argument.
These things wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the people that are interested in preserving them, and they spend a lot of time in their own time. They don't get paid for it. All volunteers. Most of it is all volunteers. This particular engine, I believe, belongs to the National Railway Museum. So, because that's all part of the country's heritage. But all the other preserved engines, it's all done by 80% volunteers, and they don't get a payment and nothing. They do it because they love doing it. And I suppose, all right, I get paid to do it, but my governor said to me the other day, he said, you do it for nothing, but I'm not so sure that I would do it for nothing, but on the other hand, maybe I might.
Someone tells me, not that you'd admit it, that you're the best driver in Britain for this type of machine. How would you respond to that?
Oi, come here. Would you agree that I'm the best driver in Britain for this type of machine? There's your answer.